Yep. So this talk tonight, he does do this. This is really, he's talking about enlightened mind in this talk. It's not just Vipashyana practice as though it were a Hinayana, foundational stage practice. It's sort of where Vipashyana practice goes, when it's perfect, when it's perfected, taken to its logical conclusion, or beginning. Its logical beginning, because there is no conclusion. So this talk is called Self-Perpetuating Awareness, and I'm just going to point out a few things from it. It's a very short talk, huh? He said, in Vipassana you develop a sense of the world containing its own intelligence. Since the world automatically has its own intelligence, you do not need to add a new perspective to it. Instead, you could just tune in to that intelligence. And in the highest teachings, which is really what he's talking about here, this is Dzogchen, the great perfection. What we live in and are a part of, inextricably, we're not separate from it like observers. What we live in is the union of space, which is all this that we're in, and intelligence, or in the Tibetan it's yin and yeshe. And the space is everything. It includes the phenomena, which are arising and passing away in the present moment all the time. So fast that you can't even point to them. Because as you turn your head, everything changes. As your attention shifts, everything changes. This is why he quotes Jamgon Kongtrul, the great Jamgon Kongtrul Lodro Thaye, who lived at the end of the 19th and into the early 20th century. Great, great Nyingma teacher, saying that space is empty. It's empty of anything, because there's no substance to any of this stuff, any of the six knowables. Experiences of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mind. There's no substance because you can't point to it, but as soon as you point to it, it's already gone. It's just passing through, like images in a mirror, in the way that all of this, the phenomena arise and pass away in space, and we are in the middle of it. And that intelligence that illuminates it doesn't belong to any one. It just is there. It's illuminating it. Everything is self-known. The term in Tibetan is rang rig. It means self-rigpa. Self-rigpa is this super-intelligence. It's the clarity of non-dual mind, the utter knowingness. And rang means self. So you don't have to know when you're aware. You know when you're aware. It's not like you got to say, am I aware? Yes, I'm aware. I think I can see it now. It doesn't happen that way. It's automatically obvious. It's self-known. Everything is self-known in that moment of open awareness, Vipassana. Anybody want to say anything? We could make this into more of a discussion, as we go along. Because this stuff is so extraordinarily profound. It's
Yeah, I have a question. Should I take the mic?
Yeah, take the mic.
Yeah, could you comment on what you just said about self-rigpa? What did you?
Rang rig.
Rang rig and the idea of no self. How do you resolve between the two? What self is there that's intelligent, that's knowing?
There is no self. You're right. There is none when we come back into this. That's right. Thank you. Because the self is the one who says, I. And that's just a distraction. It's a dream. It's like a momentary television show, that we've turned on and we can turn off. It just comes and goes. Or a story you read in a novel or hear on the radio or whatever it might be. Remember radio stories? Maybe some of you aren't old enough for that. But I do. I remember all kinds of things. Who knows what evil lurks in the minds of men? The shadow knows. And it was on the radio. Sasha remembers. You remember that? You remember Henry Aldrich? Henry Aldrich? And these stories would come along. Well, that's what's playing in our heads. And then they pass away. They're just like everything else. And we're back here. Wrong way. And the interesting thing is when you come back, you don't have to say, I'm back. In fact, if you do, it's sort of a distraction, right? It's like you've gone off again. But you know when you're back. It's just known. It's automatic. It doesn't have to be any confirmation. There doesn't have to be any pointing to it. And when one is awoken from the dream, it's crystal obvious. That's the wrong Rick. That's it, because the basic intelligence knows itself without any effort, without any pointing. There is no other and no I. It's self-known. Amazing stuff. Those Dzogchen guys. Who was it? Ken Friedman. He's an old student of Trungpa Rinpoche. He's written a book that Rochelle told me about, that Trungpa Rinpoche taught the most beginning teachings. This is from the Hinayana section, right, of the Profound Treasury. And he was teaching Dzogchen. It's like he taught backwards. He started with Dzogchen and worked down, That's what that was Ken's thesis, anyhow. So, Jamgon Kongtrul, we see the phenomenal world as empty space. This is under the heading of burning conceptual mind. What that means is, we have these stories, and we're getting tired of telling ourselves these stale stories that are so full of hope and fear and so repetitive and familiar. And so we begin to practice Vipassana meditation, coming back. And in doing that, we're burning up those habits. We're burning them up. They say in the Hinayana teachings that these habitual thoughts, they call them patterns, are worn away I've said this so many times, in 81 grades in one of the teachings they say. And the way in which you wear them away is by coming back to awareness. Is by waking up. Oh yeah, I was dreaming. What was I dreaming about? I was dreaming about paying the rent. I was dreaming about this fight I'm having with so-and-so. I was dreaming about my meditation practice. And you see that pattern, and then you're back. And in doing that, you wear out you realize it wasn't necessary. It was irrelevant, that thought. You don't need it. And that wears them away in 81 grades. And the 81 grades go something like this. They go strong, 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 medium, strong, strong, weak. Strong, medium, strong, medium. This is so Buddhist. Strong, medium, weak, and then so forth it goes, and then strong, weak, weak, medium, strong, weak, strong, and this would be strong, strong. I can't get to it, but you got the idea. And Thich Nhat Hanh goes through this in his book, which I can never remember the title of. Anybody remember? About mind? Understanding our mind. And he's talking about wearing away karma, because this is the stuff of karma. It's the stuff that binds us. Those stories we tell ourselves bind us. We believe them. And to the extent that we wear them away and come back to this crystalline awareness in the present, we become free of it. Anybody jump in at any point? I feel like, this is all of our province. He says, despite burning concepts, we are still even more intelligent. Why? Because those concepts are so confused and oftentimes inappropriate. They're old. They were born out of another situation, and now we're applying them in the present, and they don't quite fit. What really fits is the way in which we see the present clearly with the mind of Rigpa, with the mind of Jnana, of Yeshe. That's the real intelligence. He says, Rigpa is the instigator of Vipashyana. That was an interesting one. I'm sort of still trying to understand that one. Do you understand it, Isabella?
Well, I understand it. I understand it in a way that the nature of our mind reminds us of coming back.
Coming back.
Yeah.
Yeah, coming back to intelligence.
Yeah.
Right? It's like we're lost in a dream and then we come back and we wake up. That's the Rigpa. It's the intelligence. Carrie.
I think based on what you were saying, that kind of makes sense. If you think about it, it's sort of, what is the mechanism that actually, we're lost in thought, we're lost in a dream, and we're going along, and then something happens to wake us up, like we become aware all of a sudden that we're lost in a dream and we're back. So maybe, Rigpa is that whatever that is that's kind of making us aware that we're lost in a dream, and bringing us back. Because that's the beginning of Vipassana, really, in a way, right? Because we're not actually aware until we are woken out of the dream.
Right. Right. So it's really helpful, don't you think, as we sit here, to experience the alternation between, hey, there's some batteries over there, right there on the wall. The alternation between dreaming, right there, you see right by that? Between dreaming and waking up, don't you think I think that's very helpful.
But dreaming in the end is also Rigpa.
How so?
Because it's an appearance.
When we are aware that we're dreaming. What about when we're lost in the dream? We're just busy dreaming.
Then it's mistakenly conceived.
Hmm?
Then it's still Rigpa, but it's not being realized.
There's no realization of it. I mean, you can make huge mistakes. You could punch somebody in the nose. You could hurt yourself. People kill themselves from being lost in dreams. Depression. He talks about depression here. How depression, is really being lost in a very bad dream. And then we wake up from it. We come back. I'll tell you a funny one. I have a deck of the Lojong cards. You know what the Lojong cards are. And so does Sasha. Lojong was it means mind training. And it was a bunch of teachings that were brought to Tibet by a famous Indian in the 12th century named Atisha Dipankara, more commonly known just simply as Atisha. And one of his students codified his teachings into 57 slogans. And you can buy a little deck of cards, and each card, 57 cards, and each card has a slogan. And I've got one on my meditation table. And every once in a while, I just at random pick a new card. My card until yesterday was, be grateful to everyone. And I would think about my worst enemies and think, okay, how am I going to be grateful to this person? And it's a real insult to your ego, to do that. And then yesterday, I woke up feeling very depressed in the morning. And I opened it up and I said, okay, I need a new card. Mm-hmm. And I just picked one out, and it was, always maintain only a joyful mind. Oh my God. Which is an even bigger insult to your ego. See, your ego is always complaining. Your ego is always saying, things are terrible. Kill yourself. It's so bad, or that would be the logical extension. That's sort of when that ego gets its ultimate way. And then Trungpa Rinpoche used to look at us. He'd look at, we'd be all sitting there, we're listening to a lecture, and he would, all of a sudden he'd say, "Please cheer up. Please cheer up. You can do it. Cheer up." It is so hard, isn't it, sometimes, to cheer up? Yeah. Yes.
So how do we cheer up when someone hurts us, when we're hurt?
I don't know. And how? What do you think?
The thing that I find is helpful, and I think it's very hard in that moment, right? It's very hard when you're in the process of being hurt or attacked by somebody. But I do find that the recognition that whatever that person is doing to hurt you, that they are doing what they're doing because they fundamentally want to be happy. And they're not, it actually often, that hurt usually, that attacking or that aggression doesn't actually have to do so much with you as it does to do with their sort of misguided ideas about how they think they're going to feel better and be happier. And I think when you see that, to me, it opens up ability to be compassionate to those people, to recognize, oh man, this person's really suffering. They're suffering so much that they're hurting me or they're hurting the people around me, thinking that they're going to be happy doing that, and actually making things worse for themselves by doing that. And when I see that, it makes it easier to let go of, it's almost like you stop thinking about yourself and you start to think about the other person, and that kind of gets rid of some of the suffering that I experienced anyway. You know? It also goes along with that my favorite equation in the world, which is suffering equals pain times resistance. So like the suffering that, pain is part of life. We're going to get hurt, one way or the other, whether it's the loss of something, or someone or something, or physical pain or whatever. But the suffering that we create is compounded by the resistance we have to that pain. And it's sort of the same thing when people are kind of hurting you, right? So we kind of don't want to be hurt, and so we resist it. But once we sort of let that go, we see, oh wait, this is all a creation of their own suffering, and we sort of forget about our own trials and stop telling ourselves stories about that stuff. It kind of frees us up to be a little cheerier, maybe, or at least let it go quicker. I feel like. Yeah.
Isabella.
My teacher, Ponlap Rinpoche, and in June in retreat, he was talking, and he was talking about humor, and he said, the funniest of all are our thoughts.
Is what?
Our thoughts. He said, our thoughts are so funny. Like, think about it, how funny our thoughts are. And then he was like giggling, and he said, our thoughts are even funnier than Trump.
Than Trump?
Than Trump.
Oh my God.
So, and I thought that was, like, he was right.
Yeah. So anything I think that anything we can do to wake up, when you're hurt, you're sitting there thinking, that person, they shouldn't have done that to me, and they don't like me, and you're telling yourself a story, right? And so one thing is you meditate. Anything you can do to break out of that story and come back into Rigpa, into that rangrig, self-knowing, clear awareness, Vipashyana, whatever you want to call it. And so you can do it, use meditation. I think it's one of the reasons that being of help to others is such a boon, because when you help others, you're letting go of your story about yourself. And it doesn't, don't you think it uplifts one, to be of service to others, to help others. I remember the Sakyam, Mipam Rinpoche, said, if you want to be miserable, pursue your own benefit. If you want to be happy, help others. So that's sort of a skillful means, it's like almost like a trick. Help others, and, it makes you happier.
Help others, but also help yourself. 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 Help others, but
Others what?
Those people who hurt you, or
If you can help the people who hurt you, it's even better. But that's hard. That's hard. I mean, that's like that slogan, drive all blames into one. You know, it means take the blame. And Trungpa Rinpoche, in explaining that slogan, said, in any situation, I'm not quite sure about any, but any situation, you can take the blame. And then he said, I've done it thousands of times myself. So, I've done it a few times. And yesterday was a case in point. I got into a lift. And the guy started going in the wrong direction. Well, there was another person in the lift, and I figured he had to drop her. And he dropped her, and it was just me in the lift. And then he was still going in the wrong direction. And I said, where are you going? You know, I'm going to go that, I need to be going that way. I said, you're going this way. He says, I'm following my GPS. You know, the GPS is telling me. We got into a huge fight, you know, because I told him he was going in the wrong direction. He took me about 35 blocks out of the way. and I was mad, you know, and he was, you know, really mad. And finally, and then I remembered the slogan, take the blame. And I thought, no, no. And I thought, okay, you know, I'm going to do it. You know, it's so easy in that situation. I don't even know the guy, right? But I mean, it's not easy even then. And so finally, I, gritting my teeth, I said, I'm sorry I was rude. And then I even said, I made myself, it was my fault. And then he looked at me and he said, you know, I think he was a little stunned for a moment. And then he said, I was at fault too. And and the whole situation melted. And that's what I found happens, you know, when you do take the blame. It can often just melt the animosity. But it is so hard. Try it sometime when you're really feeling that person wronged me, that person is at fault, it's their fault, you know, not my fault. And then just as an exercise, because Atisha told us to, take the blame. And Trungpa Rinpoche says, I've done it thousands of times myself. I think there are situations where you have to be careful, very few, where it might have practical ramifications, you know, that you don't want. But there, in my experience, 99 times out of 100, those ramifications are not there. It's just my pride. And then the thing is that you come back out of that dream of animosity and hurt into a kind of a dream of awareness and warmth, the warmth of the present moment. So, lots of ways to do it. And then, let's see, what else does he say here? And then this is interesting. Although we may not yet have experienced it, yet there is such a thing as complete awareness beyond the techniques of simple breathing meditation and walking meditation. That's what we're talking about. This complete, unself-conscious awareness. It's just utter relaxation. And he says, although we may not yet have experienced it, I bet everybody in this room has, because everybody here is a long-time practitioner. You know, we've all experienced it. We know, we understand this. But he was probably speaking at this point to, you know, a group of new students who were just starting to meditate. But it comes, and it especially comes when you involve yourself in the tradition, because the tradition is trying to bring us to this all the time. It is the heart of the practice, the ability to rest in this moment, and the ability to simply see I'm dreaming and then be back. That is the ultimate practice. We have to be doing it as we walk down the street, as we buy our cup of coffee at wherever, Starbucks, you know, as we talk to somebody on the phone, every time. And sitting on the cushion helps, but really, it's in our daily lives that really makes it powerful. He said, We might not expect that there could be a state that is completely clear and empty, spacious, without any problems. However, it is possible, and we could experience it. And then he talks about how we live in this clear space, and then thoughts come up and dreams come up. And that's like pollution. And we live in the clear, fresh air and the polluted air, back and forth, you know. He says, it is like breathing pollution and fresh air simultaneously. He says, this practice goes beyond techniques, beyond mindfulness. Because ultimately, it's completely effortless. Requires no technique. It's the absence of that. He says we could call it active space, self-perpetuating space, or self-perpetuating awareness. It's this union of space and awareness. That they're one, the space and awareness. So one's intelligence and this space are in complete union. It's all the phenomena and the space that they arise out of and pass back into. Is there more that's worth saying here? He calls it a growing up process. It's like we're babies, you know, we're children lost in the dreams, and we're growing up, we're waking up and becoming adults. He says you're doing it yourself, learning yourself, making your own discoveries. This is why retreat and intensive meditation practice is so helpful, because we've got no excuses. We're all sort of alone with our own minds. Solitary retreat in particular. But even group practice is terrific. And then he says, you begin to realize how much of the world you have missed, and you begin to pay attention to it. I mean, we become much smarter because we're noticing the world. We're not lost in our stories, our preconceptions as much. So we could become much brighter and more intuitive, in a kind of intelligence beyond logical mind, where we can look at a person and read them, or a situation and read it, because we're open to it. We're not thinking. We don't have an agenda. This is something, I took coach training, and they really teach it, and I was really skeptical of it. This idea of using intuition, they call it. And I'm not anymore. It's like you can make mistakes, on reading another person, but much more. You become much more sensitive and aware of what is going on in other people when you practice this kind of awareness. Through Vipassana, you begin to realize how much of the world you have missed, and you begin to pay attention to it. Through Shamatha Vipassana, see, Vipassana gives you the peace. Shamatha brings you into reality. And he says, through Shamatha Vipassana, you could have a cheerful, celebratory life. Oh, wow. So, I'll stop there. Any comments? More?
Test. I wanted to come back to the intelligence. And so the intelligence is like all pervasive, and that is because appearances are, for me, I'm just trying to, because appearances are mind, ultimately, like when you think about the Yogacarya, like Chittamatra schools, that everything is mind. And because of that, the intelligence is in the phenomena, in all appearances and in space.
That turned into a question at the end.
No, I just think the subject is really interesting because
it's terrific.
You know how in some in some Buddhist schools, whether in Japan, they have this tradition of that things are actually animate and that they have their own kind of life and spirit and they have their own frequency, so to speak. And I always try to marry that a little bit with that thought about how appearances are mind. So
I'm just trying to think of something, new way to put it. Again and again in Dzogchen, you see, Chittamatra, which you referenced, was flawed because they posited the true reality of mind. And the question that begs is, who knows that? See, it says there's got to be another mind that knows the one mind. They said everything is one mind. So it was denied later, but the language was used nonetheless, and it was carried forward. And it came into Dzogchen, which has no idea of I and other whatsoever, no idea of anything truly existent, like mind. But what it's saying figuratively is that reality can be described as a combination of presence, which is the phenomena, and knowingness, which is in the space. And that these two are in union because the phenomena are just it's like colorations of pixels on a computer screen. I move my hand and it's just like the space is changing color, hand color, as it moves across, or sound color as these words come out. And it's all arising and passing away. And what it arises out of and passes away into, whatever the hell that is, they call space. Yin. Dhatu in Sanskrit. And the phenomena are arising and passing away. And so there's a formula that often is done when you receive tantric teachings and you're sitting there getting ready to wait for the teacher and you're doing lots of chants. And one of the chants goes like this. It's very simple. It says, things do not exist, and yet they arise. They arise, and yet they do not exist. And that's describing it. It's like this gesture, this hand, this sound. It arises, and yet it doesn't exist. It's this magic. It's this miracle that we're living in the middle of, this coloration, you might call it, of the 6 colors of space. Colors of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mental events. And they describe it almost figuratively as the union of knowingness and that space. Yin and Yeshe. Over and over again. And this informs the way we understand the 3 bodies of the Buddha. The Dharmakaya, you might say, at least it can be said, the Dharmakaya is often called original purity. And, kadak. And what that means is it's pure of any beingness, like thingness. There are no things. It's just that nothing exists in it. It's the space. That's what the Dharmakaya is. And then the Sambhogakaya is the way in which, although there is nothing but space, the phenomena arise and present themselves so colorfully. Those are the colors of the Sambhogakaya. That's why Sambhogakaya is all about deity, about Yidam and Dakini and Dharmapala and all these figures, the Dakinis. They're arising out of space and passing back into it. And then Nirmanakaya is compassion. And it's often called indivisible compassion. And what that indivisible means is that it's the union of the space and the phenomena that makes it meaningful. It gives it heart, it gives it joy, it gives it life, you know? And that's the Nirmanakaya compassion, the union of the space and the phenomena, that they are one. And then being one, they're indivisible. They produce love, the love of life, the love of the phenomenal world as it arises and passes away. So there's this version of the refuge, a very Dzogchen version, and it goes, I was saying if I can do it. It goes, I can't get it started. It goes something like, the purity of space is Dharmakaya. The spontaneously arising dynamic strength of awareness, there's a word. The word in Tibetan is tsal. And what it refers to is the way in which phenomena arise dynamically and create in themselves and then dynamically disappear. So the spontaneously arising, that's a big term too. Hlundrup in Tibetan. Recognize that one, right? Spontaneously arising dynamic strength of awareness is Sambhogakaya. And indivisible, yerme, indivisible compassion. And they use a word for compassion that's an honorific in this chant, tukje. The normal word is ningje, but they use tukje. So the dynamic strength, the indivisible compassion is Nirmanakaya. Nirmanakaya is the body of the Buddha. This is the union of space and phenomena. That is the other two. It's they're indivisible. And in their indivisibility, they produce Nirmanakaya, which is the body of the Buddha, and it's everywhere. It's all here. It's the presence that we have from the union of these two things. And this is Vipashyana. So when we sit and we let our dreams go, we are coming into this real world more and more. We are shifting our loyalty from the dreams of I and other, of hope and fear, to awareness in the present moment. And there's a terrific kind of renunciation that has to occur. We're giving up the desire of ego to constantly find self-confirmation and security, which is really hard to let go of, I find. Pretty ultimate chapter, this one. In the first volume. Hinayana volume. Shall we end? Everybody looks like the... Okay. Let's dedicate the merit. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. And your teacher's name is Dzogchen Ponlop.